3.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Marie Pashota from the Mental Health Association. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Representative Carlos Tobon, representing Pawtucket's District 58. Representative Tobon is co-chair of the ARPA Task Force on the House side. And you may recall that Representative Tobon was scheduled to join us last week for our town hall with Governor McKee. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances beyond his control, he was not able to join us, but we are very grateful because he's agreed to speak with us today to help us better understand how the $1.1 billion in American Rescue Plan Act funding might be used and the process for the task force and many, many more questions that I have. So welcome, Chairman Tobon. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really delighted to have you with us today. And I have so many questions for you.
Lori, well, I'm looking forward to all the questions. And again, thank you for being so accommodating. As you mentioned last week, I was very excited of joining this group and all the stakeholders to best to talk about my beliefs and the way that I believe this program is unfolding, but more importantly, to listen and to answer the questions or take some notes. So as we continue this process, you know that we have you in mind. So again, I'm very excited and I'm ready to go.
Thank you so much. So as we've already covered in the town hall and in other areas, we have a number of crises going on in Rhode Island right now. And I think Rhode Islanders, particularly those who work in health and human services, are really anxious to see how we can best spend that $1.1 billion to start to put out some of these fires. But let's start with some process questions. So can you just explain the duties of the American Rescue Plan Act Task Force on the House side?
Yeah. Okay. So the speaker put together a group of diverse members of the House that bring different perspective and have different specialties, different areas of interest that they've become specialists. And so democracy at its finest, right? And then basically he chooses his chairs. So he chose myself and Alex Marzikowski. Alex is an attorney by trade and also a farmer. So he's in a business, right? That's you know, you can imagine farming in Rhode Island, not an easy area. And then he has other members who have small business knowledge or have put a lot of focus in healthcare. The idea is that we get this and we try to find all the different areas of our economy and a complementary approach to position us into the future. And so that's the first part. The second part is that my job as chair is to help steer the conversation and talk about the 4 different buckets that the feds have outlined as to where the money's coming from and how they want us by law to spend it. Okay. And so now they've created these rules, this guidance as we refer to them. And that guidance pretty much puts us within these rails that we have to stay on, but then we can create the process as long as we stay in those rails. And so that's the part that my committee has been focusing on, understanding the guidance, explaining it in a transparent way so the people of Rhode Island also understand it. And also, I'm only as good as you guys help me be. And so are the rest of the members. So you guys are going to hear and see things that you say, oh, this may apply for us. And it's important that you communicate it to us because I'm not the healthcare specialist. I joke around. I say I play a rep on TV. But what I need is to make sure that the stakeholders and the specialists around Rhode Island, because we have 1 million people who can give us better understanding of things, then we're going to help this process continues to unfold and you're going to feel represented. You're going to be represented. And so you might be represented in one area or multiple areas. I would assume most people in multiple areas. And the main thing here is that as we deliberate, we're going to navigate this very rare occasion. And I want to just make sure that my committee, when we look back, the people of Rhode Island feel proud, but more importantly, feel like, yes, things were done as best as they could and not that we look back in hindsight, as they say, it's 2020, and we're going to talk about all the things we could have done better. So I ask that the people watching and your extended, the extension of all of you to help us get to that place. And not everyone's going to be happy, but I promise you we're doing our best.
Can you talk a little bit more about the guidelines from the federal government about what the ARPA dollars can be spent on? What are those rails that you referenced?
Yeah. So we have the public health emergency. We have the, let me just make sure I have my notes over here. So we have for capital expenses, the things that obviously to help address the needs. So let's say, for example, a few years back, we passed roadworks, right, to address the roads and bridges, capital expenses, things like that, of that nature, that help offset the cost of our state's infrastructure. On the other hand, we have mental health. We have the housing issue, the childcare. We also have like broadband and technology. And we have, it's approximately a formula of 40% that the federal government determined that was almost like a discretionary up to us, not within the guidelines, that they said out of that 1.1 billion, or about the billion mark, 40% of that we can spend as we believe best, because that formula is what they believe we covered prior as a state, prior to them sending us these funds. So they're saying, look, we're just giving you back some money and the authority to spend as you need, because you covered these extra things at a moment where it was out of unforeseen circumstances and out of your control. You guys put this money in, and so now we're going to give you guys the right to spend it freely. So and again, like, water, sewer infrastructure, broadband. So address pay, address needs, for example, housing, mental health, address infrastructure, and then address freely. So those are the 4 buckets.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I didn't understand that previously, but thank you for explaining that to me. So what is the ARPA Task Force's process for approving the governor's supplemental budget? So a few weeks ago, Governor Dan McKee provided a supplemental budget to your task force. And what happens next? Are you going to hold hearings in finance committees, or are you holding hearings in the ARPA Task Force committee?
So that's an area that's going to go primarily through finance, because at the end of the day, the money that gets dispersed and how it gets appropriated, it goes through finance. What ARPA is going to do is see that the governors within those guidelines, those rails, okay, and then I think at the end of the day, we're gonna work cooperatively with the other groups. So let's call it finance. And again, it's no coincidence why the speaker chose a chair and a co-chair from finance to be the ARPA chairs, right? And then obviously we have our role within finance. So it's to help bridge that, to have that seamless conversation. And so let's say we say, okay, Governor, yeah, you're within our rails. All right, let's look at the guidance, and you followed everything that the feds have asked. Next is, well, these monies that you're talking about, do we agree with you? And that's the process that's currently going through. We've had 2 finance meetings looking at the governor's proposal and breaking down the buckets that he determined, the different funds that he wants to put into business, into mental health, into housing. And so the question, the main thing here is, when we look back, did we put the right amount of funding into those buckets early on? Or was it a blanket approach? Like, okay, you have the main thing that I want to tell people is, like, this can't be like Oprah, like you get a car. It can't be that. It has to be very thoughtful, very deliberate. Okay. And I'll probably go back to this on several occasions, but everyone talks about a windfall. this is not a windfall. A windfall could address a lot of things. $1 billion is going to be very helpful if we do it properly, but $1 billion is not going to solve our problems. It could position us to a road of recovery and maybe into sustainability in the future, but that's only if we take the right steps now. So that's basically what it is. ARPA is just going to make sure that the governor is within his guidance, and we're going to make recommendations to finance, and finance going to determine if the governor is putting enough money, too much money, or too little money into those areas. Because again, we're going to have another 90% of the funds, and make sure that we don't shortchange anybody, but we also don't want to overfund. It's kind of like the IRS, right? You don't want to pay more than your share of taxes, but you don't want to pay under that because you could get penalized. And so we want to just make sure that no one pays for for us not doing things properly.
Thank you so much. It sounds like then the ARPA task force is more like the watchdog, making sure that the dollars are spent in the way that's required by the federal government, making sure that we're complying with the federal guidelines and so forth. And then just as a normal budget in a normal legislative session, the budget will be examined by the Senate and House Finance Committees. So will the Senate and House Finance Committees take public testimony as they normally would on budget items?
Yeah, that's the plan. I mean, we're starting to work our way back to normality, where, it goes to, so, the House constitutionally, we own the budget, right? The House is our job as a Rhode Island House of Representatives to create a budget year after year and make sure that the finances are in order. And then it goes to the Senate to be ratified. We work collaboratively between finance and between both chambers to make sure we do that delivery. And again, yes, ARPA, we're going to make sure that people stay within that guidance. We're also going to make recommendations because we're getting a lot of feedback. I mean, I get no shortage of calls every day from the different stakeholders, and we're getting a little more intimate as to that, the conversations that revolve around the funds and what they require. Unlike finance, where it all comes in at the same time, and it could be overwhelming if we didn't have a staff like Sharon and her team who've been there and have the institutional knowledge. They really simplify things for us to really be able to take it in and deliberate on it. ARPA will, my committee is going to transition soon from guidance and conversation to going more in depth and looking at the different things and the different numbers, and then working collaboratively with finance. So it's, very soon, once we've already explained the guidance and we've explained the buckets, and now we're going to have a list of different areas, we transition from explaining things to be able to have a deeper dive into the different areas that make up our economy. So, for example, mental health, and we're going to start having a deeper dive and say, you're not just mental health now. What are the different things that make up this area? And then we're going to start working with you to say, hey, how would you prioritize this? And that's the stinkiest part of this whole thing, having to deal with priorities, because you almost feel like you're picking winners and losers, but you have to be honest with yourself and say, if we have to address just one thing that we feel we can get more than a win, because you know what? My social media is very boring. So I'm not the type who every little thing that I do, I put it on Facebook. I don't. I'm not going to campaign on, hey, look, I did this for mental health. That's not my approach. My thing is to say, mental health, what do you think that we can invest in and see a difference that we can, start putting behind us, and then work to the next thing that you feel we can make a difference. And so that's going to be a conversation where you're going to have with your members and say, guys, we have an opportunity to start addressing things. Where do you think we should begin? Because I don't want to pick that. I'll probably pick the wrong area. You guys are the front lines.
So you're saying we should submit testimony when the mental health items are heard in House Finance or in Senate Finance, or before that point, so that it's in the budget before then?
Well, I can't speak for Senate Finance. I can only speak for House, right? But then what I would say, Lori, is what you want to do with this group that we're talking to today is to have that maybe uncomfortable conversation and say, here we are, year after year, we get just enough or sometimes not enough funding to address our needs. This rare occasion when they say, if you could dream, if you could win the lottery, what would you do with that money? Think about this one-time opportunity to be able to put some funds into an area that maybe collectively we can begin to address. And if we create a major improvement, that means that in the future, it's going to probably cost us less, right? And that extra, the funds that become available, now we can put into the next thing and we use it to address thing. And then year after year. So now we have real, predictable, reliable funds because we made the proper investment. And what I'm saying is to you and to the people watching, you guys need to have that conversation of say, if we could begin to address, let's say these 10 points, which one would be number one? Which one would be number 10? Who can wait the longest? Like who can we mitigate things with now? And who can we start addressing things now? Because eventually we're going to get there. But when we want to start spreading the funds out so much, then what's going to happen is nothing is going to get done. Everyone's going to be happy for a year or two, but when the funds run out, we didn't really accomplish anything. So yes, have that conversation, get those points in order, and begin to submit them to ARPA. And we're going to look at it and say, yes, you're within the rails, and then go over to finance, and then we start talking about those funds. And what I would ask is be sincere, because here's the thing, this is not a negotiation. Unfortunately, a lot of groups say, well, we really need only 50 million, but let's ask for 100 so we could drop off at 50. Let's cut through that crap, right? Let's go straight for the kill and explain to us why and how you got to 50, right? Versus us having to disseminate that and say, Lori, you're asking for 100, but you really only have 50 here. That's going to take so much time versus you guys saying, look, here's 50, here's how we got there, and here's why. And so that will allow us to look at your area very critically, and be able to advance your agenda faster than having to cut through all those weeds.
That is so helpful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It really gets me thinking. The challenge is, of course, bringing all these mental health focused and health and human service groups together to the table and hashing out our priorities and coming to an agreement. Often what we have is different groups prioritizing different needs that are all legitimate, but we're not a cohesive group. We're not communicating with one another as well as we should be. We're not collaborating enough. So that is good advice. And I will take that back to all the partners, all the stakeholders that I know in health and human services, and perhaps maybe hold some meetings where we can start to prioritize and then think about appropriate, realistic funding amounts for our top like 1 or 2 priorities. That's really good.
And just keep this in mind. Now, imagine you guys are specialists in this area and that hasn't been defined, right? So now imagine I hear mental health, I hear housing, I hear all these different areas. And if you put us to the side, you're going to be the losers, right? Because we're going to prioritize based on that versus, like I said, and again, for you and for everybody watching, have the uncomfortable conversation, because that's the best way where you guys are going to all be on the same page, and you're going to help us. Otherwise, if we have to determine what's most important for you, it's not going to go well. It's not. So I and again, we're here for you.
Thank you so much. What do you think the timeline for all this is? Right now, you're looking at the governor's supplemental budget and the ARPA Task Force. So when do you expect it to make its way over to the House Finance? And then, ultimately, when will you start spending the money?
So we have, so we must spend all the money and have it committed by December 31st, 2024. Okay. Now, don't worry, we're not going to wait that long. However, we have been one of the states who have taken our time
Mhm.
to begin having these conversations. And here's why, right? There's states all around the country who've been spending since they got the money back in, I believe, March, right? When the law was signed. We had just passed our budget in June, right? So what I say to everybody is, for us to put together an extra $1 billion that we didn't have to raise taxes and have this discretionary funds, it'd take us a lifetime. So we don't have to be in a hurry to spend it. And that's where we're going to have, that's where we're going to probably shortchange people if we're in a hurry. And so we'd be creating issues anyway. So what we're right now, the governor's proposal is being viewed by finance as we speak. Like, we are looking at it. What's going to be determined is, yes, governor, you're right on point, or this is too much, or this is too little. That's really where the conversation is going to be. And then moving forward, are we going to, how are we going to complement those funds within those areas in the future? Are we going to give them more or less, whatever? In regards to spending the money, we want to start putting the money into the economy. We want to start making sure that you have what you need. But if the federal government hadn't given us $1 billion, we'd be working with what we have, right? We'd try to make do and do the best we could. And the mental health area would be addressing the needs as best they could with what they have. So if you guys don't know where you would put those funds yet, we don't either. And so what I am telling every organization and area that reaches out to me is, have those uncomfortable conversations. We've had proposals coming from different groups, housing, the different family, the well-being of family, the groups that address those areas. And I believe they're generous amounts that they are requesting. I have my beliefs and my thoughts as to if this was put together. I'm never going to question people's intent, and I truly believe people do it from their heart, right? Like, no one's in mental health to make a killing and to make all this money. You're in it because you truly love what you do and you want to make a difference. And I believe that every area of the economy is functions in a similar way, right? But the fact that I'm on this side when it comes to funding year after year, and what I hear year after year and how they make do year after year, I think that it's important that when we look at, we're going to be a little more critical. And I think that some of those amounts have been overly generous and are not necessarily going to address the things we need long term. They're going to put more band-aids currently, and band-aids don't they don't fix things, they cover things, right? And when I had an interview recently with Providence Business News, I said we have to be surgical. Surgery means you are taking care of something, so hopefully it doesn't come back, right? I don't want to just put a little band-aid or try to make someone feel better or numb the pain. We need to address this, and it's going to hurt for a little while, but once we get over that bump, things are going to look really nice.
I love that you talk about Band-Aids versus getting to the root of a problem. One example that comes to my mind is that Rhode Island recently discovered the Cahoots model, which is a program that pairs social workers with law enforcement officers as they go out to crisis calls related to mental health and substance use disorders. And it's a wonderful model. But my thinking is, I am so glad that we're talking about this and that we're acknowledging that we have so many crises going on, but the majority of the crises that these social workers and police officers would be called to are for people living on the streets with untreated mental health conditions, including substance use disorders. So the root of the problem is that they have these untreated conditions because they're unhoused and they're not able to care for themselves and take their medications every day. And they're struggling with these untreated illnesses. And the symptom is that their symptoms of their untreated illnesses are causing them to come into contact with law enforcement. But couldn't we just reduce the number of social workers we might need on the streets if we just housed people? And then they wouldn't be homeless, and we wouldn't have to pay as much for homeless shelters and social workers on the streets. They wouldn't be taking up the time of law enforcement officers. They wouldn't be taking up the time of courts. They wouldn't be incarcerated and costing us money from prison or jail. And of course, medications are not covered by Medicaid or Medicare in prison or jail. So the state pays for that when someone's incarcerated. So it's like this whole snowball effect of expenses, where the root of the problem is the fact that they need supportive housing. And if they had that, then we could sort of nip all these other issues in the bud. And we know the research shows that providing housing, supportive housing to people with disabilities cuts down on costs in the long term. It's like you said, it hurts up front to spend money to build either a group home or to pay for scattered site supportive housing or long-term residential treatment centers. It hurts to pay for those things up front because they're pricey, but in the end, they save you money and they address a human rights issue for people with legitimate disabilities. But I love that you're talking about that.
So I'll say a few things. One, I believe, so we have like three sectors. Let's think of the economy in three sectors, right? We have for-profits, nonprofits, and then we have like this social business, right? This Muhammad Yunus concept that has come of age in the last 20 years, right? So we have that. One of the biggest issues that I see is we demonize one group over the other. Now, I've worked as an entrepreneur and I've worked for businesses, and I've also worked in nonprofits, and I've read a lot on Muhammad Yunus, and I believe that we reinvent ourselves, right? Just like our body changes every so many years and all that stuff, so does this world, right? And we can't talk about technology the way that we talked about it in 50 years ago, or never mind 100 years ago, right? And I always tell people that what might be fiction today will be nonfiction tomorrow. And I bring the example of Julius Verne in 1891 when he wrote, writing a book and talking about let's go to space and put in a spaceship on the moon, and everybody laughed. And 70 years later, that fictional book was nonfiction, right? So why am I saying that? Dare to dream. Don't be afraid to come up with crazy concepts, because they might not be crazy in the future. You'll be proven right after all. And I happen to think way out there all the time. So two, I agree with you 100%. We need to address this housing thing. The question is, how do we get there? And the reason I was bringing up the different sides of the economy is that we can't, I always say, I hate to be at a meeting with like-minded individuals, because guess what we all have in common? We're going to agree. So I probably will waste an hour or two of my life versus having uncomfortable conversations with people who oppose it, understand their rationale and thought process, and then start working through that. And so we have conversations in too many silos, and then we wonder why things aren't getting done. So with housing, how is an issue that we consistently underfund year after year and the problem continues to get worse, how is it that we haven't had begun to address it? And now everybody believes this is the magic pill. It's not. This is not the magic pill. And the conversation, again, I don't want to get my numbers messed up, but the last proposal was, I think it would address close to 10% of the issue. How are we going to spend once in a lifetime money on 10% of an issue and have 90% of the problem still left? That doesn't work. So what we need to do is bring together both sides, both nonprofit business, and have that conversation and say, hey, when you guys are in business, how do you look at something in order for it to work and be profitable and to be able to sell it to investors? And then have that conversation. If you're in the nonprofit, what's your rationale behind your decisions? Right. And so then if we could bridge that, we'll probably create a sustainable model long term. Will it be the quantity that was expected? Probably not. But will we get long term results? Absolutely. And so I think that people are getting excited with this money saying, let's put the money in now. Well, that money now might not address the problem long term. It's going to make you happy for a little bit. And that is where I am being a stickler on this committee. I'm not going to allow for us to get excited over short-term results. We need to think long-term, and long-term hurts, right? So when I say, sometimes when someone gains a little too much weight, that ain't happen overnight, right? And when you try to get those quick remedies of dropping weight very fast, you're probably going to get sick. So that's not the result you're looking for. But if you begin to address that weight issue in a timely manner, you're going to get to that ideal look that you seek, and that weight that is proper for you, and you're going to be good after that, right? So when we have these shifts that they don't address things long term, because you're going to create pain, you're going to create that an issue that you might not have had you gone the longer distance, right? And so one of the ways that I believe, I took a leadership course a few years back, and one of the areas we dove deep into was called systems models. So you create, are you familiar with that? But those systems models, you create a circle, and you figure out where you start and how you end up in the same place every time. And then you start having those, again, uncomfortable conversations where you say, how did we get here? Okay, when we do this, what's the result? And you start looking at the micro of everything, and you start trying to figure out how to reverse it. And then you go on to the next issue. How do you reverse it? And eventually it's going to take you back to answer the obvious, which is, how did we get here? And if we start having those conversations, we start really analyzing how we got here, how we consistently get here, and how we got here over time, and we start working backwards, I believe that we're going to get to those things. And the thing is that we're always in a hurry. We always want to see results right now. The Google effect of instant gratification, right? Nobody goes to the library anymore. Everybody wants to just press a few things and address things. And it's like my wife, she thinks she's a doctor now, right? Because she will go on Google, something hurts, she goes on Google and she says, look at all the things it's saying. I said, well, is it a doctor? No, it's people talking about their experiences. And usually whatever's crap floats up top, right? And you really have to dig deeper into your search to find what's factual. And it usually gets covered up under a bunch of ads and a bunch of things. But people are used to, now we're in a world where the headline is the story, and people aren't reading beyond that. And so we have to stop being conformist in that sense, and go into the granular. So I would say the systems models, and when it comes to housing, we know that yes, if somebody has housing, 50% of diseases and as long as they have a roof and food, I think that 50% of diseases or things that can occur are like wiped away. And then we also know that when they go to the hospital, a few hours at the hospital will cost us the same as it would cost us 1 month of them having food and shelter. So that we know. And why does it happen? I think that's where the mental health part happens, right? Where the people who need help are there's that what's the word? There's that gap, right? I almost think of Good Will Hunting. Remember when he goes to see Robin Williams, and he's avoiding the inevitable, the treatment, right? And he keeps trying to take his psychologist and spin him off like he's smarter. But eventually the treatment begins, and the rest of the story is magical, right? In order to create that magic, with those individuals on the street that we want to support, it's going to take time. We have to have patience, but we also have to give you the resources to get there. And if it could start by us having even temporary housing, and it doesn't, I'm not saying to have a shack, but it doesn't have to be these, unbelievable places. What we need is, let's get people off the street right now. And in order to do that, there's so many things that we can do. I mean, I've suggested doing the shipping containers and redoing them, and that could be projects. I suggested, hey, let's build them at the ACI, so they have, they start gaining understanding, and possibly if they are in a trajectory, in a path to be able to be released, at least they leave with some skills. And along the way, they helped offset our cost of this area. We need to be able to work collaboratively with different areas. And too many times, politics gets in the way. And the inner politics gets in the way. Not even us, the elected politicians. I'm talking about institutions. They kind of get in the way. And so if we're in this together, we're going to only come out of it together. And we need to be able to have a little bit of sacrifice, and not everything could be about money. So we need to be able to leverage things. There are going to be areas where, think about it during the recession. If you have no money, you might have had a skill and you'd be bartering, right, to get through. Well, we need to do a little more of that, right? Let's dig deeper as to what can I do where I'm fine not getting paid, but I'm thrilled to be able to contribute something that I'm good at to help offset certain costs and certain things that are preventative. And I think that if we all look further inside of us to see what we can do and how we can contribute additionally, not just do that, let's say, Earth Day cleanup. Well, that's once a year, but it's piling up. It's piling up for another 364 days. What can we do every day to help chip away at things? I'm sorry for these long answers.
No, this is fantastic. I was going to say, thank you for being so real. And your passion and creativity and proactive thinking are so refreshing. You're speaking my love language for sure. I could talk to you for hours about this. And I'm so happy to have this opportunity to hear more about your thinking and get to know you. I know our time is growing short. Are there any other issues about the ARPA Task Force or the supplemental budget that you wanted to talk about? Anything you wanted to share with our audience?
Lori, I would say what you're going to get from me all the time is sincerity. And what I ask is you be just as sincere, you and all your stakeholders, all the people and entities that make up this organization. Because without that, we're jumping through these hurdles and pitfalls we're going to constantly have, because we're not going to speak truth, right? And I don't need to be a specialist to know that you're being sincere, and I don't need to be a specialist to help you get to where you need. I just need to make sure that you truly do want it, and when I have that honesty, then I can operate. I can just go into something, right, and not think like, oh, they're gonna throw me for a loop. Now I have to start digging through things, right? So I think that the biggest takeaway for this is have those conversations, and when you present something to us, be as real as possible. Okay. Second, I can't stress this enough. This is not a windfall, but it can put us in a really good place. And so, again, the honest conversations help. Third, we're your public servants, right? I'm not special. I'm not any more special than anyone else, but you guys are doing the real work. I just have to compose it. I just have to put poetry out at the end, so you guys, it's palatable, right? And so that only happens with the contributions of those in the front lines, like the people you're representing. So I can't, I'm not going to speak like a politician or the so-thought politician. I don't speak for everybody in the House or the Senate. I speak for myself, and I got elected based on what I was, what I shared, and what I showed my constituents, right? And I make up, I'm one of 75. We're going to have certain commonalities, and I have to, what's important to me might not be important to the person in the south of the state or the north of the state, but I have to find areas where it's important enough for them to support me, and vice versa, right? And that's how the sausage is made, that people might not like. But when all sides have a better understanding of not just what's important to you, but what is important, right? Because what's important to me might not be important. It's just important to me. When we can have consensus on what's important right now, and then we can start talking about how to address that, right? And then hopefully that becomes an afterthought and we move on to the next thing. We need to, again, I mentioned earlier, for-profits and nonprofits have to have more conversation. We can't just go to the for-profits, to their foundation, and ask them for money. And the for-profits can't just go and create a foundation to offset their taxes. It truly has to be a marriage, because we're in an economy together. We're moving this state forward together, not just individually. And I think that I would say to your members, I'm a Democrat. I go to Republican events all the time, because why wouldn't I want to hear it from them? If they start talking to me why they make certain decisions, I get a better understanding as to, oh, okay, this is what triggered that. And then I can go back to my caucus and say, guys, versus it looking like a competition, like, oh, well, we're going to take this and they're going to take that. It's better like, hey, the reason that they did this was because of this. So the reason they said this was because of that. We can take those things and create better policy versus it hypothetical or just reading it from a paper. So I'll say these last two things, right? There's a saying in Spanish that I like. There's two sayings. One that says that the paper can hold everything, could hold anything. So you can put anything on a paper. And I love it when, individuals come up to me and they say, this was peer reviewed. This was a white paper from a scholar. That's fine, but nothing beats experience. And I'm sure that some of your members will read a paper and say, yeah, no, this is not the way it went down, right? So it's important that a scholar could come up with a concept, but rarely when they're flirting with something, they could come up with and write something really elaborate. But it's those of us who are ingrained in things who can probably give the best assessment. So that's what they say. A paper could hold anything. Un papel aguanta todo. That's the saying in Spanish, right? Secondly, there's another saying that I like that says, de las carreras solo queda el cansancio. So from being in a hurry, all you get is exhaustion. So let's not exhaust these funds because we're in a hurry to see that they might make a difference. Let's have a thoughtful pause. Let's analyze everything. Let's look to put these funds in the right place and change our trajectory long-term, not just for the short term. So I would say those are the things that I feel that I hope that this conversation has been somewhat helpful. I might give these longer answers, but I just want you to know that I'm trying to pack in as much as possible in this short time. But more importantly, this is not it, right? You guys have access to me anytime. If you are the bridge between the members, Lori, call me anytime, and let your members know they could write to me anytime. Share your information with me. The more that I get, the slower response, but don't shy away from it. I know what I put myself into, and and I'm going to give you the best that I have to offer.
Oh, thank you so much, Representative Tobon. This was an amazing conversation, and you've given me so much to think about. I can commit to trying to bring the various health and human service stakeholders to the same table so that we can get our ducks in a row, prioritize our biggest needs, and then come up with some realistic dollar figures for them. I can commit to trying to do that. I can't promise all the stakeholders will participate, but I can do my best. And I think that this would be certainly within the Mental Health Association's scope of what we do, because we're very mission-driven. We focus on policy development, public education, community research, and advocacy. So this is right up our alley, and I'll be happy to put myself out there and try to get this done for us. But thank you so much for all the insight you've shared. And this was a wonderful conversation. And you've inspired me to really try to get people together to do this, because you're right. If we're all asking for different things and have different priorities, none of us will get what we want.
If you spread your love too thin, nobody feels loved at the end, right?
That's
If you
right.
put a little more focus in that, and then I'll just say this little analogy, right? Especially in this area, right? We're treating individuals' mental health, and some of them utilize different substances to sort of not have to think of reality, right? Whether it be alcohol or drugs or something like that, to get a little high or get something in order to address that issue. But then once the effect goes away, they're back in the same place or even worse, right? And that's part of the things we try to mitigate. Let's not put ourselves as professionals in that, and let's not get a little high over a few dollars that are not going to put us in a better place after this, right? Let's take from the areas that we work in, and let's think about that. These funds can make a difference, but if not appointed or in an acute fashion, I mean, everyone gets a grant, and sometimes those grants aren't enough, right? So I just again, thank you so much for reaching out, for giving me this opportunity to have this follow-up conversation, and just stay engaged. And yeah, I mean, you work with everybody who wants to, but if they're not going to work, we just have to put them to the side and work with that group. And that's not a threatening thing. It's just about, either you're part of the process or you're getting in the way. And I would dare to say that if you're in this business, you want to be a part of the process.
Can I ask just one little tiny follow-up question? I don't want to rob
Absolutely.
more of your time, but when the federal government gave you guidelines about the 4 buckets, and you talked about one of being like health and human services or mental health, did they give you a dollar amount, or is that up to the state of Rhode Island to decide how they're going to allocate the 60% that has to comply with the federal government's guidelines?
They have suggested amounts,
Okay.
right? But they're not, because again, you got to think of regionally around them, and like they created policy for the whole country, right?
Mhm.
And different parts of the country are facing the same things but in different ways, right? So let's say in the warmer areas of the country, for example, when I couldn't get on, I was traveling and I was in LA. Their homeless issue is different from ours. We
Mhm.
both have it, but they have it year round in a different way because of their climate, right? Hawaii, um, Florida, right? Miami. So we're all facing the same challenges, but they probably have a different degree of it. And because of that, it spins off into a different direction of, right? So there's an amount that they believe can help with that, but they're not telling you have to spend this much because that would be unfair. So I would say that that's where you guys come in.
Okay.
That's where your hard work, your deliberate approach, and your honesty, that's where that number is going to be composed.
Okay. Deal.
All right.
We'll work on this. Okay. Thank you so much, Representative Tobon. We'll be in touch, and I look forward to working with you in the future on these important issues. Thank you so much for what you're doing and for your time today, and for being so clear and genuine with us, and for the great insight. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.